Good evening. It's been a long time coming. After 16 years on the lam and 2 years in custody, the criminal trial of James Whitey Bulger began today at the John J. Moakley Courthouse in South Boston, just blocks away from Whitey's former home turf. We'll talk about the opening statements and what the first witness had to say, but first we take you back to Whitey's heyday, what he's accused of doing, and how he came to partner with the FBI. Over the years, we've talked with many of his allies, aides, and enemies, including former FBI agent John Connolly. But we start at the beginning. Boston in the 1960s. It was all-out gang warfare. The battle was over turf, control and protection of local businesses, loan sharking, gambling, the growing drug market. But mostly it was retaliation, an eye for an eye, as gangsters flipped allegiances, turned informant, or simply ratted each other out. By the mid-1970s, law enforcement had had enough. Their target, La Cosa Nostra, led in Boston by Gennaro Angiulo and his 4 brothers. It took almost 10 years to bring them down.
Yesterday, a federal grand jury sitting at Boston returned a 20-count indictment charging 7 individuals, including Gennaro Angiulo, Victoria Nicolo Angiulo, consisting of multiple acts of murder, illegal gambling businesses, illegal loan sharking businesses. The defendants were arrested last
That was September 1983. Bill Weld was U.S. attorney, and his organized crime task force had struck gold. But it was a long time coming. And as we now know, nailing the Angiulos meant giving the Winter Hill Gang, namely James Whitey Bulger and Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, a free ride. The 2 gangsters had become informants for the FBI, working with Agent John Connolly and his boss, John Morris, to wipe out Boston's Italian mafia. What kinds of information Whitey Bulger and Stevie the Rifleman Flemmi were able to provide to you that was so valuable to the FBI that the FBI was willing to turn their heads on some of the crimes that they were doing?
Well, the FBI really didn't turn their heads. Flemmi filed an affidavit in which he said that he was allowed to do anything but murder.
Which meant gambling, drugs?
No, anything but murder means
well, I'm
cars,
trying to be specific.
Yes, yeah. Gambling, drugs, bank robberies. That was far too broad. That was not the agreement.
Are you saying that's untrue?
I don't agree with Flemmi's assertion that he had the right to do anything but murder. They had the right to conduct a gambling and a loan sharking business and collect rent from bookmakers with no violence. And that decision was made by Jeremiah T. O'Sullivan, the head of the strike force. It was, Larry Saha testified to that in court. That's the exact message that he was given.
What kinds of information were they able to bring to the FBI that was so valuable, as I said it before, that they were willing to allow them to continue a loan sharking operation? Like what did they bring in?
Well, these were 2 highly placed assets of the Bureau. And you have to remember why they became assets of the Bureau.
Which was that you wanted to bring down,
well, yes,
the Italian
we
mafia.
wanted to bring down the Italian mafia. I mean, the mafia was the #1 investigative priority of the FBI. And as such, Bulger and Flemmi were not on our investigative radar screens. They were, however, at a sufficiently high level in their own organization to be able to laterally affect the mafia.
Were they so well plugged into the Angiulo family, the Patriarca family, that they were able to get information on those people and bring it to the FBI that eventually led to their indictments?
Well, absolutely. They were long-term sources of the FBI, and they were that. It's important to recognize why they became sources of the FBI. They were targeted for elimination by the mafia.
By the Italian mafia?
By the Italian mafia. And in the late 70s, mid-70s. And
did they come to you?
No. it appeared that there was going to be a gang war and that they were going to initiate it. And I felt strongly that I could stave off a gang war should I reach out for these people and convince them not to go to war with the Mafia, because the Mafia at that time had no intention of taking it, as they say, to the street with these people. And I was able to convince them that they ought to do the same thing to the Mafia that the Mafia were doing to them, and that is use their friends in law enforcement to whittle them down, and who was ever left they would murder. They did it with the Joe Barboza gang.
Right.
And the Mafia tipped their hand to these people. They had some intelligence from inside the Mafia themselves. They were tipped off what Jerry Angiulo's and Larry Zanino's intentions were for them. And based on that, they then decided to play the same game. It was a high-stakes poker game is what it was.
Did anyone in the Italian Mafia suspect that Bulger and Flemmi were informants for the FBI?
I don't believe so.
In 1988, which is only 10 years ago, seems like ancient history, the Boston Globe first reported that Bulger and Flemmi were FBI informants. And that has since been confirmed. It's now been reported that the head of the organized crime task force inside the FBI, John Morris, was one who tipped. That's been reported. I don't know for myself that that's true. I have to say that he was the one who leaked that to the Boston Globe. He did. He admitted it in court. Why would he do that? Why would he let that information out?
Well, it was an unconscionable act of treachery. There could be no other reason for leaking that to a news media, to Jerry O'Neill of the Globe, with whom he had a long relationship, by the way. I mean, he collaborated on a book with Jerry O'Neill. Jerry O'Neill and his partner Lear made money on John Morris.
Richard Lear from the Globe.
Yes. And in '88, it was to O'Neill that he gave Bulger's name as having a business relationship with the FBI.
And what was in it for John Morris at that point to out Whitey Bulger?
I believe the judge asked the right question. The judge asked him, "Did you believe that this could get him murdered?"
Him being
Jim Bulger murdered, and he said, "Yes, I thought it could." And he says, "And did you do it because of the money?" And he denied
so
it.
we'll back up, because it also came out in court that John Morris had accepted so-called loans.
A loan.
Yeah, a $7,000 loan, which I guess was never repaid.
It was a $5,000 loan.
And I thought it was $7,000. There was another $2,000 that came.
Well, he says that.
Well, all right. I can't nitpick the details here. A loan. He got a loan.
The details are important to me.
Okay. He got a loan that he didn't have to repay.
Yeah.
So here's the FBI getting a loan from the Mafia.
Right. I mean, it was an act of corruption. He was a corrupt. I believe the guy was the most corrupt agent in the history of the FBI.
So now, why does he have immunity in all of this?
That's a very good question.
And what is the answer?
The answer is, here's somebody that put bombs under people's cars, took money from gangsters, lied under oath, flunked polygraph exams, tipped them off to investigations, and the prosecutors gave him immunity.
And not
they
you.
denied it to me.
They're saying that you are a rogue FBI agent.
I have never heard anyone say that.
Characterized as that. Well, there was a quote out of the paper.
Well, yeah.
From an unnamed source.
It was
the favorite
quote,
thing to.
Yeah, it's an unnamed source. The fact of the matter is, I never committed a corrupt act.
Why? I don't understand why all these people have immunity anyway. Stevie Flemmi has immunity. John Morris has immunity.
I had an unblemished record in the FBI. I was commended by every director in the FBI's history, from J. Edgar Hoover till the time I retired. I had an unblemished record. There's one reason why they don't want to give me immunity. They are afraid of the truth. The government is afraid of the truth. When Mr. Popio proffered to them what I was prepared to say...
And what was that?
That was that, for the most part, I agreed with their case. I had no trouble with the induction ceremony portion of that case. Those are all my sources. The Angiulo case had 9 sources, 5 of them are mine. The second in the trilogy of cases that brought the mob down was a Vanessa's case. There were 3 sources. All 3 were mine. Okay,
but we're confused about this. I mean, I understand the induction ceremony. There was an informant there, and the government, the case now says if there was an informant at that induction ceremony,
then they shouldn't have had the wiretap in there. I understand that, but what are you saying that they would be afraid of the truth? I don't follow that.
Well, they indicted these people for gambling and loan sharking. And they were allowed to do it. It was a policy devised by Jerry O'Sullivan from the Strike Force. It was communicated to them on several occasions by John Morris, and I communicated it to them. By the way, the important thing here is that I don't want immunity for any corrupt acts. I don't need it. I wouldn't take it.
I understand.
I only need it for the narrow issue of authorization.
You're saying that the government doesn't want to accept the fact that illegal activity was indeed condoned. That was the deal, and they're denying that.
Does anyone really believe that Mr. Bulger and Mr. Fleming would survive the FBI for 20 years unless we intended them?
I don't believe it right now. I think he's still
unless we intended for them to survive.
Well, that's what most people believe right now, and it would be hard for you or anyone to convince us of otherwise.
Well, I don't know. Right now, I do not believe they're protecting him.
The other thing is that one of the great curiosities in all of this, and I know you're from South Boston, we want to know what the relationship was, if any, with Billy Bulger, how closely connected he was with his brother,
President
whether
Bulger.
he knew that his brother was an FBI informant. Did he know that?
The simple answer is he knew nothing about it, and his brother wanted it that way. That was at his decision when we first had the relationship, the business relationship.
You don't think he ever told him?
I don't think he ever told him.
Were you close to the former Senate president at the time?
I've always been a friend of his and remain so to this day.
You were ever aware of a case where there was a murder committed by Whitey Bulger or Steve Fleming? Wasn't it your obligation as a law enforcement?
It would be my obligation.
Were you ever aware of any?
No, I never. I mean, these guys were sources of mine. They're not going to sit down and tell me. From the very beginning, it's understood.
Did you ever ask them if they killed anybody?
Well, why would I do that? He was a source. I mean, the top echelon criminal informant program, the reason that a lot of these, they're having difficulty with this right now is it's in conflict with the Attorney General guidelines. It doesn't make any sense. And that's one thing that has emerged from these hearings. The top echelon criminal informant program was geared towards developing top echelon mobsters, primarily mafia members, who by definition have all killed at least once. The bottom line is our mission was to take out a mafia family, and we accomplished it. Mm-hmm. We took out 42 members and associate members, all of whom I would guess have killed at least 5 people, directly or indirectly. So you're talking about people who have killed maybe 200 people, and we took them out, using a gang of 2.
With FBI agent John Connolly's protection, Whitey Bulger and his associates enjoyed free rein over South Boston. In 1980, Bulger was looking for a new front for his criminal enterprise. That's when he forcibly took over a liquor store run by Julie and Stephen Rakes. And when they complained to the FBI, John Connolly told Whitey. 12 years ago, Julie told us the story. Their store, Stippo's, had only been open for a week. Julie, pregnant with their 3rd child, was alone at the store. Stephen was home with their 2 other young children when Whitey Bulger, Stephen Fleming, and associate Kevin Weeks came knocking. So these 3 guys knocked on your home door. They came in, and what did they say to Stephen Rakes?
They came into the kitchen and sat at the kitchen table and proposed a deal. The first deal was that he was going to be partners with us in the liquor store because apparently some people had come to Whitey to put together a contract to kill my husband because supposedly the liquor store was a bad thing. And so Whitey came with a proposal to say that he'll be partners instead of killing him. So when my husband called me and said, we're going to have a partner, And of course, I'm safe and sound at the store, not knowing what was going on, was diligent, and we have no partners. Saying, no, we're not partners with anyone, especially not him. Why would we be partners with him? And he says, I'll call you back.
When Stephen Rakes called Julie back that night, there was a new deal. Bulger, Flemmy, and Weeks were now the proprietors of Stippos. Whitey handed Stephen Rakes $67,000 in cash. There was no negotiating.
And did Bulger and Flemmy leave any doubt in your mind, in Stephen's mind, that if you didn't go along with the deal, what would it mean for you?
When Whitey and Flemmy and Weeksy sat at my kitchen table, my youngest daughter was only 13 months at the time, teething, waddled, crawled over, and Whitey Bulger put her up on his lap and allowed my daughter to teeth on the barrel of a gun. And of course the conversation, whatever was going on, stopped, and everyone observed that, and Whitey just went, it'd be too bad you won't see her grow up. So the picture was really clear that we would die, my children would die. There was going to be no mercy.
And no mercy there was. Bulger, Flemmy, and Weeks immediately moved into the store, changing its name to the South Boston Liquor Mart, running their illegal businesses from the back room.
So once this had happened, I mean, you're terrified, you're outraged at the same time. What did you do? Who did you tell?
We went to my uncle, who was a police detective, to see if there was anything that could be done. And my uncle ironically said, oh, I just happen to know an FBI agent who just moved back into South Boston, and I'll go and talk to him. And as it was, he went to John Conley, the FBI agent, and told him our story. And my uncle came back with a message from John Conley that said, unless we were willing to wear a wire, there's nothing he could do for us.
Wearing a wire was out of the question. 3 days later, Whitey Bulger summoned Stephen Rakes to the liquor store. Waving a pistol in his face, Bulger said, back off. We know you've gone to the FBI.
20 years ago, my life was changed. Now, I want people to know what happened, and I want justice. I want to be repaid for what was taken away from me. Not only was our lives threatened, but our livelihood was taken. Our whole being was threatened. We were lucky to survive it, and I think we should get back what was ours.
I came into a circle when I was 18 years old. I was working as a bouncer. And it wasn't like this happened overnight. It was a progression over the years that I became deeper and deeper involved in crime. And then when I was involved with the murder, double homicide with Brian Howell and Michael Donahue, I knew then my life was over and my life had changed for good.
But you continued.
At that point, you really had no choice. I mean, I had been involved in serious crime with them. I had been involved with murder with them. And basically, there was no walking away at that point.
You told Ed Bradley on 60 Minutes, and you say in your book that you were, an accomplice to murder. But did you ever murder? Were you right there? Did you pull triggers? Did you stab? Did you help pull teeth out? Did you?
No. I've been involved in fights where people got hurt, and a fellow tried to stab me one time, and I did shoot him. But as far as the murder is concerned, no.
Well, why should anybody believe that? That you didn't actually commit the murders?
Well, it's been proven. I mean, Steve Flemmy pled out to the 10 murders, and he cooperated who actually did the killing and stuff.
But you knew exactly where the bodies were buried?
Correct.
Why did you know that?
I helped to bury them.
So you were there for the actual burials. Did you witness the murders?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How did you come to cooperate with the FBI, or the federal government, I should say, regarding John Connolly? Did they approach you? Did you say, I know more, I can say what his involvement was with this? How did that happen?
When I reached an agreement with the DEA and the state police on the investigation, the Justice Department came into it. And one fellow that had already been indicted had already talked about John Conley, and they came to me. And part of my plea agreement was to be truthful and honest about it, everything that I had done. And so John Conley's name came up, and I told him what I knew about John Conley.
Is John Conley guilty of everything that he's been charged with?
Well, it remains to be seen. He's charged with
murder now.
Right.
Is he guilty of murder, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think, you know, that remains to be seen by the courts, you know.
What do you think?
Did John Conley tip off about this gentleman? Yes, according to Jim Bulger.
The Materano?
No, about Callahan, the fellow that was murdered down in Florida. Was he guilty of the charges of tipping off the indictments? I mean, yes.
Do you think he was definitely guilty of tipping off Whitey Bulger before the indictment was going to come down in 1995?
Well, definitely. He told me.
Yeah.
And I told Jim Bulger.
Oh, so you were the one who actually relayed the message?
Correct.
Mm. You write in your book how you had such a normal upbringing. You know, there was always food on the table. Your father and your mother had arthritis, but your father was a hard worker. You have 5 successful brothers and sisters, not younger. Some of them went to Harvard. How did you get into this track when the others went on another?
Well, my mother had arthritis, severe arthritis. My father had a heart attack, and I started working instead of going to school. My brother got me into Commonwealth Prep the following year, and based on that, I would go to Harvard. You know, they're like legacies, but it wasn't for me. I was just out of school too long. I really wasn't interested in, and so I started working bouncing, and that's how I came in the circle of these people, and you know, I got involved.
Whitey Bulger had long-term romances with 2 South Boston women, Teresa Stanley and Catherine Gregg, who went on the lam with him in 1995. But there were other women in Whitey's life, including Lindsay Sear. Lindsay met Whitey in the mid-1960s while she was working as a waitress, and he was working at a nearby construction job. They began dating, and soon after, Lindsay Sear gave birth to Whitey's only known child. How many years had you been dating by the time you had the child?
About a year and a half. Mm. And until our relationship became serious, and then he said to me, we really have to talk. And I said, okay, fine. He said, your choice is Pier 4 or Jimmy's Harborside. So I took Jimmy's Harborside, and we went to dinner, and he sat down and began to tell me the story of his life. And I was shocked. But
what did he tell you?
He told me that he had robbed banks years before, that he had spent a year on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and that he'd done 9.5 years of a 20-year life bit, and that he'd been in Alcatraz, and that he never intended to go back to jail again.
Did he tell you he was clean at the time then?
I don't think that was part of the discussion, but he was still working.
Listening.
He was still working in construction, so I assumed he was. And I assumed when he said he'd never go back to jail that he wasn't doing anything that would put him there.
Now, all right, so how did he react when you told him you were pregnant?
I've always said Jimmy can do silent better than anyone in the world except my stepfather. He was totally silent, and he looked at me and he said, it's too dangerous. And I, at the time, was all of 21. He was 16 years older than I. And I said to him, I'm sure I'll be fine. And he said, no, you don't understand. He said, I've got to think about this. And I mean, to me, at the point where someone says you're pregnant, you're done. Yeah. There's not much to think about. But he said, I'll get back to you. And so he took me home, and he called me the next day, and he said, we have to seriously talk. He said, this is dangerous. It's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for the baby. And it's very dangerous for me. So he sat down and he explained to me that he was not working construction anymore. And because I was working every day, I had no idea what he did. He lived with his mother.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And he said, this is too dangerous.
Because he feared that the child would be targeted in some way.
Exactly.
That
he
you
said,
and the
you
child
make me
would be
vulnerable. There are 4 people I will turn up on a street corner for. You, that child, my mother, and Billy.
Yeah.
And that was too much danger.
Did he want you to have an abortion?
No, that was never anything he suggested. I told him I didn't believe it. I didn't believe in abortion. I believed it should be available, but I certainly
But so when he was
couldn't do
telling you it was too dangerous, what did he want you to do? Get out of Dodge?
No. I think it was such a shock to him that I think he was kind of dumbstruck, if you will. And he was trying to figure out, and I think it was the worst possible scenario for him.
Now, how was he around the baby?
He was wonderful.
Really?
Yeah, he really was. I had a really hard time and ended up in intensive care. And I woke up in the middle of the night and he was sitting next to me and he said, "You will never do this again." And I looked at him and he said, "You damn near died. Do you know how close you came?" And I said, "Well, I'm still breathing now, right?" Because I was a little, hazy. And he said, "You're fine, but you will never do this again." I said, "How's the baby?" He said, "He's gorgeous. And he's definitely a Bulger." And I said, "Really?"
And how much time did he spend with him? The baby was only 5.5, 6 when he died?
6.5.
6.5.
He became ill on Friday, and he was dead on Monday night. Jimmy was always in and out of the house, around the house. He was there at least 3 or 4 nights a week. We did things together. We went away on trips, the 3 of us. I worked. He'd turn up at the office, or I parked at his house in Southie because he lived with his mother, and took the subway to work. And we always went out on weekends. He was very much a part of our life.
And what happened to the baby? He got Reye's syndrome, which is still a phenomenon today. But did he get sick first, and then you gave him aspirin?
Yes, we did. He was the start of the 2nd grade, and they think that he had chickenpox internally. He'd been homesick all week, and it just so happened I wasn't working. I was on unemployment at the time, and I took him to the doctors and what have you. And on Wednesday he seemed better. Thursday I thought he was really good, and we were talking about whether or not he could go to school, because Douglas had perfect attendance all the way through the 1st grade. And he was very upset he'd lost perfect attendance. And I said to Jimmy Thursday night, "I think he's going to go to school tomorrow." And Jimmy said something about, it's Friday. Why bother? Send him Monday. And Friday he was sicker, so I took him to the doctors in the afternoon, and he was vomiting again, and he was just miserable. And the doctors gave me medication for the vomiting, which I gave him about 5 o'clock when we got home, and it didn't seem to make him better. So I gave him a bath to make him more comfortable. And Jim called, as he always did, and he said, "How's it going?" And I said, "He's sicker." And my pediatrician was actually out of town, so I had gone to the covering pediatrician. Bad things always happen when you're dealing with a stranger. And he told me to take him to the accident room if I was that concerned. And in the 60s, or 70s, that was something they said to you to make you stay home. And so I was talking to him on the phone, and I said, he just isn't right. I don't know why. And he said to me, "Well, you're the best mother I've ever seen in my life, so if you think there's something wrong, take him to the accident room." And I did. Well, I got up to get his bathrobe to go with, to put a bathrobe on him. And I grabbed a blanket, thankfully, off the bed in his room. As I walked back into my room, he looked up at me and he said, "I love you, Mommy." Ooh. And he became violent. And I could not control him. So I threw the blanket over him and dived onto him, wrapped him, grabbed the car keys and the medication that the doctor had given me in case it was wrong, and headed for the hospital. And truthfully, I forgot to call Jimmy, so they finally, I guess it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, they told me that I had to go home. And I had not filled the car with gas as I usually did on Friday, and I ran it out of gas and I walked home. And they called about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had not given them permission to transport. So I said, well, I don't know how quickly I can get there. He said Mass General had agreed to take him. I said, but put a witness on the phone, I'll give you verbal permission to transport. And I did that, and then I called my father to come and get me and take me. And we made it up to South Shore Hospital before they moved him. And he had had 3 cardiac arrests by then. God. And it was, the nightmare was on.
I can't even imagine. In June of 2011, the FBI came up with a new tactic aimed at finding Bulger and his longtime girlfriend, Catherine Gregg. The FBI released this public service announcement focusing on Gregg and her habits.
This is an announcement by the FBI. Have you seen this woman? The FBI is offering $100,000 for tips leading to Catherine Gregg's whereabouts. These photos are from the early 1990s. Gregg has had plastic surgeries. She is wanted for harboring James Whitey Bulger, a fugitive on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. 60-year-old Gregg is the girlfriend of 81-year-old Bulger. He has a violent temper and is charged with 19 murders. Call the tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI.
The Boston FBI's Special Agent in Charge, Richard Delorier, explained what led to the decision to focus on Catherine Gregg. And here from the FBI's Boston field office, our Special Agent in Charge, Richard Delorier, and Supervisory Special Agent Richard Teahan. Welcome to both of you. So I'm going to assume, Rick, that you now believe that they are still together, that there's no reason to think they've split up after all this time.
Well, thank you, Emily. Yes, there's no reason to believe that they have split up. There's no reason to believe that Mr. Bulger is deceased right now, so we're operating under the presumption that they are still together, and that is the presumption that is leading our PSA campaign.
One of the speculations has always been, Rich, that they're in Europe. So why target these PAs primarily to America and specifically American television shows?
Well, Emily, I think it's important that we start with with domestic. It's our duty and our obligation to cover both the domestic and the international spectrum. We have covered Bulger in Europe and internationally before, but it's time to profile Catherine domestically. Look for leads. Look to those people that may be their neighbor or coworker. A person that can really provide us a really good tip.
I mean, I've done a lot of reading and research and pieces over the years about Whitey Bulger and Catherine Gregg, but I don't know that much about her. I mean, was she ever married? Did she have children? Does she have brothers and sisters? Where was she born? Who was her circle of friends?
She was born in the Boston area. She was married, but she was the girlfriend of James Bulger, and that's what we focus on. She does have some family in the area, but a very small circle.
And they contend they haven't heard from her at all?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe that?
Trained investigators will take almost anything with a grain of salt, but we're pursuing every possible lead.
But going back all these years when, Whitey Bulger did, we now know, contact his brother at least once after he went on the lam, would it be sort of the norm not to, or would you think that eventually somebody would want to contact somebody from their past, either a family member or a friend? Yeah.
That was Bulger's method of operation, both pre-fugitive and after going on the run, is he would utilize third parties. It's our duty not only to conduct the fugitive hunt, it's our duty to look for those who harbor Bulger and or Gregg. That's part of our mission as well.
Is doubling the reward money really an incentive? Don't you think if people had known who she was or who he was,
he's worth $2 million. Wouldn't they have turned him in a while ago?
Sure. Well, we think it's a step forward in emphasizing the importance that we are placing on locating both Catherine Grieg as well as James Whitey Bulger, and doubling that reward is a sign of our ongoing commitment to locate her as well as Mr. Bulger. And the $2 million reward that is being offered for Mr. Bulger right now is the largest reward the FBI has offered for a domestic-based fugitive.
You have only been in the Boston office for 11 months, and you came in Washington before that. I mean, had you studied the case? Did you know much about it?
I was generally familiar with it. I'm a New England native and had previously served in the Boston FBI office here back in late 1990s and early 2000s. So I was quite familiar with the case and some of the challenges associated with it. So it didn't take me long to get up to speed on it.
Richard, I was interested to hear you say today that you assume he's living kind of under the radar screen, but I presume you also mean in plain sight.
Yes.
You think they're living as a couple? And there was a credible sighting, as I recall, in Europe like 6 or 7 years ago.
The last known witness sighting of him is in London.
And you think it was him?
In 2002. As best as we can tell through thorough investigation, we believe.
Did you have photo evidence at the time?
It was a witness sighting of him at the time.
Was he with her?
Not at the time, no. He was sighted by himself. But, you know, I think it's just important to highlight their relationship. He depended on her. That was clear. And we really do believe, based on his method of operation, pre-fugitive and after fleeing, that they would be together and that they would be operating very quietly in a community, low-key, and almost like a fatherly figure and a mother type, couple.
2 days later, James Whitey Bulger and Catherine Grieg were caught in Santa Monica, California. Anna Björnsdottir, living in Iceland, saw the public service announcement on CNN and called the FBI, saying her former neighbors, going by the names of Charles and Carol Gasco, looked a lot like the people she saw on TV.
At approximately 5:45 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, using a ruse, agents and other task force members lured Mr. Bulger out of his apartment. Agents determined that the individual was, in fact, Mr. Bulger. He was placed under arrest without incident. Agents then went back into the apartment and arrested Miss Grieg without incident.
The day after the arrest, one of Whitey Bulger's former henchmen joined us. John Red Shea was just 16 when he came under the mobster's influence.
Red Shea, you actually knew the guy. You knew him well. You worked with him. You actually ended up doing 12 years in jail, too. Tell us your story. How'd you know him?
Well, I grew up in South Boston, and I met him when I was a young age of 16. And he told me the story about growing up with a family member of mine who he used to rob trucks with from the projects, and it was an aura of him that he held, that you looked at him and it was you respected. In some cases, kids like me, a young guy like me in the neighborhood, respected and wanted to be like. And eventually, I was introduced through associates of his at a young age, and eventually I surpassed those associates and became a boss in the organization. And I ran the drug entity of that.
Were you ever involved in any of the murders?
I was not.
You can't say it if you were, can you?
Well, let's put it this way. I wasn't.
Okay. You were actually out in Santa Monica recently, and you were
correct.
imagining what would have happened if you would run into him.
I have a producer friend in Los Angeles, and he's a producer of the movie Usual Suspects. And yeah, exactly. And I actually was writing the screenplay for my book, Rat Bastards, and I was in the neighborhood. So I was out there quite frequently, 3 blocks away, where he got captured. Yeah, it's...
How would it have gone down if you had run into him?
Well, it probably wouldn't have been good. you know, it probably wouldn't have been good.
What do you feel he did to you? I mean, I know you ended up doing
Well,
time.
I mean, he knew everything that was going on with me through his sources at the FBI, John Connolly. He knew that. He knew exactly what was going on through that the DEA was, they were the targets. They were called on that. They were called, the FBI was called by the DEA telling them, we are targeting these guys and for the narcotics distribution. And so he knew all that. He was well tipped, and he
let you take the fall.
He was tipped off saying, hey, be careful where you speak. This is wired, that's wired, this phone's tapped. And then he had to devise a plan to take some of that heat off of him. And who better than the young guy on his way up, who's in that business, who's trying to become somebody even, you know, more bigger in that, climb up the ladder. Who better than the young guy, the youngest guy of all? And a young guy who was very, you know, wanted to prove himself. There was no one better than that for him. It was a perfect opportunity.